Morning, everybody. I'm so glad you're here with us as we're continuing our series called Dark Horses. A dark horse is like an underdog story, some of our favorite movies, also some of our favorite books. So what is a dark horse? A little known person, unlikely to succeed, who ultimately accomplishes great things. Can't you think of some of the great biographies? If you were to look up the all-time great biographies, or at least, recent biographies, some of the best that would come up are like Alexander Hamilton. That was turned into a Broadway musical, huge success. And then the story of Winston Churchill, there's one called A Life. It's always at the top of the list of biographies. Autobiographies, self-written, like Nelson Mandela's A Long Walk to Freedom. And then Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. These are some books that we had to read in school. And you get to know these stories. These are underdog stories. These are people that were facing sometimes insurmountable obstacles, and yet they did something that left everybody saying, that was amazing. I mean, with Hamilton, you have an immigrant who becomes a founding father of America. That's phenomenal. Mandela, you have a prisoner who becomes the president of South Africa. That's really impressive. But also a reminder that sometimes stories look great only in hindsight, like later on when they write a book about it. You're like, wow, that was really impressive. But if you were to go back in the moment, in the present time of the struggle that made their story great, I don't think they probably felt very adequate in those moments, or like there was much potential for them to do anything that was that impressive. I mean, do you think it seemed very impressive or great or possible when Hamilton's mother died, left him as an orphan in the Caribbean? Probably didn't feel very great when Mandela was spending 27 years in prison. And I think that's also, I bring that up because whenever we look at the stories of characters in the Bible, it's the same thing. We, so many years later, are looking in hindsight back at their lives, and we think, man, Bible people are heroes. And I don't know if you've read the Bible much. If you haven't at all, we often just have this perception or this assumption they were just like perfect people. They have halos, and they've achieved sainthood, and they're just better than me. And I would never be that kind of person. I could never be that kind of person. You feel like you could never be that kind of person. And I'm just promising you, 90% of them, if you were to look back, you would say, looks great. But if you were to go to the present, like in the moment, many of them were in situations where you would say, they're never going to amount to anything. You would say that about them, let alone them saying it when they looked in the mirror. God's never going to do anything with me. And yet God used ordinary, normal people like you and me to do great, extraordinary things. And that's the story of Gideon that we're going to look at today. If you have your Bibles and you want to follow along on your phone or in your Bible, we're going to be in Judges chapter 6 here in just a moment. Judges chapter 6. I get a little scared when I tell people to go to Judges because whatever preconceived notion that you have about what the Bible is going to just be blown away when you read the book of Judges. You're going to be like, this is what people of God look like? I can relate to this. This is messy. And that's exactly what we find. So Gideon is the kind of person that massively felt inadequate. And I don't even know if you knew that there was a character in the Bible named Gideon. I don't know if you just thought Gideon was the guy that snuck into hotel rooms at night and left Bibles in the nightstands. But he was a real person. And the story, if you don't know the story, I'll just kind of hint at it. The story that is normally told about Gideon is this incredible story where he took 300 soldiers on a night raid and kind of overwhelmed and overtook 10,000 enemy opponents and soldiers. It's this incredible moment, and that's the story that people normally tell. It's a great story. But I want to talk about the story before the story today. Before that seemingly great moment that we now talk about for all time because it's in the Bible, we find a character in the moment, in a present time, where he felt incredibly inadequate and very, very scared. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to in this room. So my opening question before we get into Gideon's story, do you ever feel inadequate? I do. And I think if you were to ask people this question, they would say probably, if they were being honest, like 7 times a day. When I wake up, I feel like I'm not ready for the day. And then when I go and talk to my kids, I feel like I'm not a very good parent. And then I get ready and I feel like I don't look very good. And then I get in the car and then I feel like I hear things on the radio that make me wish I could go do that. And then I get to work, I feel like I'm not, it's like it just rolls on from there. I just feel inadequate. I feel inadequate. Do you feel inadequate about finances ever? My goodness, I wish I could be like them or have what they have, or I just feel like I haven't managed finances well. Do you ever feel inadequate in your career? Like, man, I had hoped things would have progressed and have gotten to a better point, and they just haven't. Do you ever feel inadequate as just a student, like at school? It's like I don't have the grades that the other kids have. Or I'm not as popular, like the kids don't really click with me, or we don't really get along. I just feel like it's a struggle. You ever feel spiritually inadequate? Like you're just having a conversation and God did something really cool in your life and you bring it up and you're really proud of it. And then somebody's like, oh yeah, that reminds me of Haggai 1:13. And then they quote it and you're like, oh, come on, what? How'd you just know that? And now you feel inadequate and like, well, maybe it wasn't that great of a moment for me because you look at you. And then somebody starts praying and you're like, wow, this is like the best prayer I've ever heard in my life. God just must be clapping the angels right now. Like when I pray, they're like, boo, this is a horrible prayer. Where's that other guy? Can we get him to come pray again? You ever feel inadequate? Like I just don't measure up. I just wanted to be real and honest with you before we really dive into the message. I've had huge feelings of inadequacy and fear and just feeling like I didn't measure up. So I grew up in an environment that kind of told me that I could do anything. I was really talented. I mean, I was voted most talented in the 8th grade yearbook. Just be impressed. Be impressed with that. Went to a performing arts school, athlete, all that stuff. And then I went into the real world. And I led my first ministry job. I led a little church outside of Cincinnati. And I had no idea what I was doing. And I tried everything. And nothing grew. There were huge financial difficulties on the church. And I struggled with depression and feelings of inadequacy. And when you're that, I was just in a place where I wasn't very emotionally mature and I just didn't know what I was doing. I couldn't really handle it. You have daily conversations or moments, maybe not daily, but probably weekly or monthly, where you just feel like maybe I should just go do something else because this is just too hard. I'd rather just quit and go do something else because the church wasn't growing. We weren't experiencing what I thought was success. Meanwhile, I had friends that were at these big churches and great things were happening and God was moving. And I was like, why doesn't God move here with me? God was moving. I just was having so many feelings of inadequacy that I couldn't see it at that time. Around the end of that season, one of the best things that ever happened to us, my first 2 kids were born, boy-girl twins. Also, the worst thing that I've probably ever gone through happened. My brother passed away after being in a car accident. And I was just really vulnerable in that time. And I came to Compass, and being here in this environment, it took me about 2 years to recover and to start to feel like I had some adequacy. And I know that's, some people have even come up to me this morning and said, no, man, you never seem to display that. I might not have displayed that. I'm just telling you on the inside, that's how I felt. And even to this day. And I know that many of us, you might seem real well polished and macho and strong on the outside, but I know all of us, I think every single one of us, you're being honest, struggle with feelings of inadequacy. Where do these come from? Well, I think there's 3 things that maybe they come from. Number 1 is unrealistic criticism. Somebody said something to you that it just hurt. And it wasn't even accurate, what they said. But what they said, the perception of it, and just, is that the way you feel about me? And maybe you weren't even able to process it with maturity at that time. It was just too much. You were young and they said something and you've carried that criticism with you ever since. And it has hurt. And you're probably thinking about that exact thing that was said to you right now. It's still with you. The opposite of that is unrealistic compliments, where people say things to you that are so encouraging and they tell you you can do anything. And that sets up a feeling like if I don't exceed everybody's expectations, if I don't do all these things that they have said I can do, then I will have let them all down. And you'll feel like a failure if I'm not perfect. And so now you live a life that's a lie, and you have this facade, you have the Instagram filter life, and you're trying to portray that everything's okay, knowing on the inside that you have this huge fear that if I'm not perfect, people will reject me. And that can mean a lot of feelings of inadequacy as well. I think the final one is probably most common. I think the other two are present, but I think unrealistic comparison is also a huge matter, where we just live in an age where we compare ourselves everything, like what they're wearing, what I'm wearing. I wish I had their life. And everything that we do, it's like you just have a conversation. You're like, man, they just went skiing. I didn't go skiing. I don't even have skis. It would cost us like $500 to get a jacket, and I can't afford to go skiing and all this stuff. And you feel like, man, I don't have the life that they have or whatever it is. And we just compare ourselves. We live in an age, I think, with social media that has driven unrealistic comparison to a level that we've never seen before. And we just feel inadequate because we compare ourselves to other people. So what do we do about feelings of inadequacy? Well, let's look at Gideon, because I think in Gideon, you're going to see the same thing that you and I do in how we respond to feelings of inadequacy. Now, to set this up for you, you need to know that this was a time, Gideon lived in a time where, as you read through the story, it really feels like at any moment, at any day, his entire nation could have just fallen. Can you just imagine any day America could just fall? That's how you feel. Like you wake up today and you just feel like, are we still going to be a nation by this evening? Because there were the Midianites, this other nation that was just totally bullying them. They tried to grow crops. They tried to feed themselves. And they would just roll in. They would slaughter people, cut down all the crops. And the people are just starving in this nation. And they're just totally bullying them and conquering them in a significant way. So Judges chapter 6, verse 6, we pick this up. And it says, Israel was reduced to starvation by the Midianites. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord for help. The Lord sent a prophet that called them to repentance. And then something interesting happens. God reached out not to a hero, at least that we would think was a hero. He reaches out to a normal, ordinary person. God does not flip open the Rolodex and say, hey, who should I call in today? Abraham, Noah? Y'all don't even know what a Rolodex is, have you? What's that? Ask your parents. No, he calls a normal, ordinary person, like you and me, a guy named Gideon. I think we pick up in verse 11, I believe. The angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. I love that in this verse, there are more accolades given to the tree than to Gideon. Did you notice that? Gideon is threshing wheat. I have never done this, but from what I know, the way you would want to thresh wheat in the ancient world is you're going through the refining process. You would then get on an elevated place with some wind, throw it up in the air. The wind blows the chaff away. The good wheat falls down, and then you gather that and you go on and you refine it. Make sense? Notice, however, Gideon, instead of being on an elevated place with good wind, is in a wine press. If you've never seen a wine press, if you ever have the chance to go to Israel, let me just encourage you to do it. It's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I know it's expensive, but it'll change your life. You should go to Israel. This is what a wine press looks like. It's a common tourist spot in Israel. And there were others. This is a really nice one. But you get the idea here. It's a pit in the ground. You would stomp or press out the grapes. The juice would run into this basin, and then they would refine it and turn it into wine. It's in a pit behind a tree. There's no wind. There's nothing to blow away the chaff. He is hiding in a pit behind a tree. Why? Because he's scared of the Midianites that might come and take his stuff away, and he's really hungry. So he's like, if I hide down in here, I can thresh the wheat. I just think this would have felt really ridiculous because it was probably wet down there, and it's probably sticking, and the chaff he can't get it separated. He's probably really frustrated. Some of you feel like this. Do you ever feel like what I'm trying to do, if it were under perfect circumstances, this would be great, but what I'm doing right now is not working? You feel like that? You feel like your job is like, I've been trying to do this. It's not working. And you say, I get this. It's Gideon is hiding in a pit behind a tree. So that's the picture that you need to get here. Not of some bold, courageous person, somebody who's scared and is hiding from people that he is scared of. Now, what happens next is really interesting. Look at the next few words from God. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty hero, the Lord is with you. Mighty hero. If any of us were to look at Gideon hiding in a pit behind a tree, you would say, this is not a mighty warrior. This is a farmer. This is not a mighty hero. This is a mighty wuss. What are you doing? This is not who this is. And maybe you can feel the same way. But as Pastor Drew pointed out to me this week, I thought this was really powerful. I wanted to share this with you. Isn't it true that God doesn't call us what we are or even what we were? He calls us what we can be. Man, he does this so often. Because I think you have to understand, God isn't just stuck in this present moment. He knows where you're going and the potential, and he knows. He has the ability of what we would think would be hindsight, but for him, it's just the knowledge of who you are and what you can do and accomplish. He's sovereign, and he can see. He knows you. So you might be in this present moment, but he knows what you can become. And so he calls you not from this to discourage you, but he calls you by this name that is who you can become. And we see this all throughout the Bible. There's a guy in the Bible named Abram. And maybe you've heard the name that God called him, which was not Abram. At least he started calling him Abram at first, but there's this significant transition point where God starts calling him Abraham. Different. And what does that name mean? It means father of nations. When God started calling him that, Abram wasn't even a father, let alone a father of nations. But God doesn't call us what we are. He calls us what we can be. One of Jesus's number one disciples was a guy named Simon. But Jesus didn't call him Simon. Jesus called him Peter, which means rock. Maybe you've heard of Peter. But if you know the story of Peter, you know he was anything but rock solid. He was hit and miss and on and off and hot and cold, and he was flaky and sort of compulsive. He was not rock solid, but God did not call us what we are, but what we can be and what we can become. So my guess is when you look at yourself, you see some things in the mirror that make you feel inadequate and broken, and you probably feel a lot of things from your past that make you feel like there's no hope. And I just want you to know, when God looks at you, he sees so much more than what you see in yourself. And that's the first thing I want us to pay attention to today and to be encouraged by. God sees so much more in you than you see in yourself. You might see somebody, I'm not a very good dad. I'm not a great mom. I'm not really a great boss. I don't really know what I'm doing with my business. I'm not a great fill in the blank. And I just want you to know, I don't know if this sounds cheesy, but I hope it'll stick with you. When you feel helpless, God sees a hero. And I know you don't believe that. You're going to push back and be like, no, not me. You're talking about the person next to me or in the section over there or at that other church or whatever. Not me. I know you're going to push back on that. But I just want you to know, you feel helpless, God sees a hero. This is what the story of every great Bible character is. I don't know what your perception is of the Bible characters. You think, oh, they're just perfect. They didn't do anything wrong. They were just courageous heroes. In the moments and the reality of the present, when things were suffering, God called them to great things beyond what they could even ask, think, or imagine. David, his story begins, the runt of the family, small. Nobody thought he would be worthy of anything. But what did God see? A great and mighty king, a man after God's own heart, is how David is described again and again. Rahab, people just saw a prostitute. She's a prostitute. God saw a brave and courageous woman of God. Peter, flaky, on and off, hot and cold, impulsive. What did Jesus see? The greatest foundational church planner in the history of the church. God calls you what you can become. And he sees you something greater than you can ask, think, or imagine. So he shows up, calls Gideon, mighty hero. I want you to look at Gideon's response, because this is your and my response to it. He says, pardon me? Excuse me? Who are you? Me? You're talking to me, mighty hero? I don't think that you can't be talking to me. And then he goes on and he says, if the Lord is with us, then why has all this happened? Why are all his wonders that our ancestors told us about, where are they? They said, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? If you don't know that story, God split the sea open and they escaped from an oncoming army that was tracking them down on dry ground. Miraculous. But now the Lord has abandoned us and given us into the hand of Midian. God's saying, Gideon is saying, what are you talking about? I don't see anything that you're hinting at here. You call me a hero, but none of this seems to be anywhere relevant to my life. The word wonders here. It's talking about great things, not just miracles, but people. Like Moses was the one that led them through this, who we talked about last week. If you missed that message, you can go back and listen to it. But maybe he also thought about things that you did through Abraham, things that you did through Noah, things that you did through these other people. Why don't I see any of that now? And maybe you feel that way, like great things that happened to Winston Churchill and great things that Nelson Mandela accomplished. Like, I don't see that in my life. There's no hint of that in my life. You might call me mighty hero, but I think you've got the wrong person. And I think every single one of us can relate to that. If the angel of the Lord showed up to you after this service, like he showed up to Gideon in a pit behind a tree one day, called him mighty hero. If the angel of the Lord showed up to you after this service and you were climbing into your old minivan with peeling clear coat and old Wendy's Frosty cups and the cup holders, and he said, mighty hero. Say, who are you talking to? The guy, me getting in the old minivan? You think I'm the mighty hero? And we would push back and we would give excuses and feelings and senses of inadequacy, just like Gideon did. So he says, pardon me, what are you talking about? But look at God's response in verse 14. The Lord turned to him and said, and it was pointed out to me that whenever this word turned, it's like when a parent looks at their kid, is like, wait, did you, what? Did I stutter? Do not make me repeat myself. So he turns to him like that and he said, go. So I'm not going to repeat myself, go. To which we think, oh, you want me to go get prepared? You want me to go take a class? You want me to go take some training on being a mighty warrior? You want me to go to Camp Gladiator or whatever it is to get ready for the competition? You want me to go do that? No. Look at what he says. Go in the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you with the strength and the abilities that you already have. And here you are hiding in a pit behind a tree thinking, what strength and abilities are you talking about? And here you are in 30 minutes climbing into your car thinking, there's no way Luke was talking to me today. There's no way the Lord was speaking to me today. There's some other people. I don't have the strength and the ability. And I'm telling you, no, this message is for somebody here today, and you need to hear, go with the strength and the ability that you have right now. God is calling you, and you know that he is, but you keep pushing back, and you keep giving excuses as to why you're inadequate and you're not ready for it. And God is saying, you're ready, go. And some of the strength and the abilities that you don't think you have, you're going to find them. They are going to surface as you begin this journey and this adventure, whatever God has called you to. I'm really excited about the future of this church. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been putting forward and asking you to pray for the first future home. We're going to have a building in the future at 7821 Davis Boulevard. And I think that there are plenty of opportunities for myself and maybe for other people to come up with all sorts of excuses as to why we're not ready. And we could feel really inadequate. And it's like, man, we're not ready for that. And we're not going to, how are we going to pay for that? And how are we going to get all the volunteers? And how are we going to do all this stuff? All sorts of feelings of inadequacy. But I think that you would also, as we talk about it, and I talk with leaders, and as we've prayed, we just feel like God's saying, go with the strength and the abilities that you have. Which leads me to my second point. I think God has already given you more than you can imagine. You just aren't able to appreciate it and probably won't until you go and you can start to see, oh, you know, all those things that I thought were real detriments, things that really broke me, they actually prepared me for this battle that God has called me to go into right now, or this moment of victory. You start to see when I go, those things rise to the surface. Why don't I see them? Maybe because you haven't gone yet. You have no opportunity to exercise those strengths and abilities because you've been hiding in a pit behind a tree. It's time for you to go. And you're going to see a lot of those qualities, those things that you were made for. Things that when you start to encounter them and use them are going to light you up, and you're going to be like, man, this is what I'm for. This is who I am. But I wonder if God's just waiting for you to go. To go. Like I said, we could give all sorts of excuses as to why we're not ready to go do a building on a land and all that stuff, but that doesn't keep us from going. And so I want to ask you today, on a rainy, misty day, at 2 p.m. today, we're going to gather at 7821 Davis, and I think we've got the address on the next slide maybe, but we can throw that up there. We're going to gather there and pray at 2 p.m. today. Now, if there's lightning or tornadoes, I will cancel it. But at this point, it's just sort of misting. I want to go pray over the land. It's winter. If we delay this a week, it could rain again. So just bring an umbrella and wear some boots, and your kids will never forget it. I know mine won't. They'll remember moments like this where we weren't swayed by some mist. I mean, I know we're Texans and rain just scares us to death, but it'll be okay. I know we've got a couple friends that are from England in here, and it rains like every single day. What is this? This is just normal. This is like a breeze for them. But we're going to go out there today, and we're going to pray and say, God, you've called us to go and to do something. Would you open up doors for how we're going to pay off this land? Would you open up doors for how we're going to reach out to all of these people? Would you open up doors for how we're going to do ministry and transform lives in a way that we can't even ask, think, or imagine at this point? Now, maybe I start throwing out vision about the future of this church, and you think about your involvement. Maybe you're new here. It's like your first time. And you're like, I don't know if I'll ever be a part of this. Well, you just stick around. You'll find that you can actually become like really cherished part of this family. And I hope you already know that we've done a lot of things today to try to make you feel like you're already a part of this family. But still, you might feel like, you know, Luke, I see where this is going, and I just feel inadequate. I'm not really like an upfront stage kind of person, so I don't think when we get on that kind of platform that I'll really be very helpful. Oh, listen, you don't understand. People behind the scenes actually usually have more impact than the people up front. I mean, I might like tee it up a little bit on stage or the worship or something like that. Somebody gets up and speaks, but usually something behind the scenes, a conversation, something in a coffee shop or a Bible study, that's usually where God really transforms somebody and begins to change their heart and their mind in a powerful way. Usually, most of the people that make a decision to follow Jesus and or to be baptized or something, usually I do that over coffee. That's where they make that decision. You say, well, I'm not a really good speaker. I don't really have the things to say. Oh, that's really good, because most of us who are really good at talking are really bad at listening, which is usually the way God changes people the most, is when you listen really well. So if you're a good listener, you're a pretty prized role in the kingdom, because listening is really good, and you can listen and hear people and then pray for them. Maybe you feel like, well, I'm not really going to have a role in whatever that future vision is because I'm a stay-at-home mom and I just don't have the time or the capacity to just go on a mission trip or anything like that. Oh, listen, the impact that you're going to have 6 or 7 days with your kids is going to have 10 times the impact that most people have making 6 or 7 figures. Or maybe I talk about future vision and you think about your past and you're like, well, I don't really qualify because of my past. You know, you wouldn't really want me, or God wouldn't really want me, or God didn't really have anything for me because I really screwed it up back in the day. And here's what I know, and I hope that you come to know or learn from other people. Usually those that have broken pasts appreciate more the grace of God. And they, through that ability to relate to people's problems and brokenness, God uses them to do greater work than anybody else would because of their history and the appreciation of God's grace and what it has led them to do and to accomplish. I love what it says in 2 Peter chapter 1, verse 3. By his divine power, God has given us everything we need. He's given everything you need for living a godly life. Now, some of you haven't really decided that you're on board with this, or I'm not really sure I'm a Christian and stuff like that. I'm just telling you, there's something being offered here that the void and the gap in your life, the separation that you feel from God, Jesus came to repair that and to make you right and to bring you back into right relationship and to give you everything that you need. And those of us that have put our faith in Jesus, that Jesus took our place, took our sin and condemnation, and now we're forgiven. Through that, God gives us everything that we need. Like right now, if you're a follower of Jesus, you have everything that you need to live a godly life. And when you see that word, godly life, those two words, don't just think like the ability to be kind and sweet and to be a pushover. That's not what I'm talking about. A godly life is the life of a conqueror. A godly life is a person who has victory over sin and brokenness and helps others achieve victory and brings them up and gives hope and leads people out of darkness into the light. God has given you everything that you need. And yet you still push back. And so did Gideon. My Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. I do not have what it takes. Luke is not talking to me. There's no way. This does not apply. And I'm just telling you, you need to pay attention to God's response to Gideon here. He says in verse 16, oh, listen, Gideon. Oh, let me clarify something. I will be with you, and you will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. I will be with you. This leads to the third and final thing I want to leave with you today. God working through you is less about you than you think. Yeah, let me just be honest. I am inadequate. And you aren't God. But God working through you, that's what it's all about. There's something that God can do through you that empowers you and makes you able to do much greater things than you ever could have done otherwise. I know that there's things that have hung you up and you've been stuck on and you've not been able to break free from. God can break through those things. So I want to encourage you today to go in the strength and the ability that God has for you. There are ways for you to connect. There are ways for you to build friendships that are meaningful and real and authentic. There are ways for your kids to find community. There are ways for you to experience God's presence in ways that you've probably never experienced before. There are ways for you to serve in a way that is meaningful and purposeful, that will be exactly what you feel like you were called to do and to be. And we introduce you to those ways at Discover Compass. And if you're saying, I don't know, where do you want me to go? That'd be a good step. That'd be a good first step. In 2 weeks, go to Discover Compass on a Sunday morning at 11, and we're going to show you these ways and try to help you find the next step. I'm not going to worry about 500 steps, 10 steps ahead, 20 steps ahead. What's just the first step? You go, and God will start to reveal the way to you moving forward. Earlier, I talked about how inadequate I felt back in that first ministry, and I just want to be honest with you. To this day, I have all sorts of feelings of inadequacy because I feel spread thin. And I often wonder, am I doing any one thing very well? But then I remember, this is not my church. This is not my campus. This is not my ministry. This is Jesus' church. This is God's campus. This is God's ministry. So it's not so much about me, it's about God. And God is the one who nourishes and builds up and cultivates and accomplishes great things. And so I just want you to know, walking out of here today, whatever it is, the problem that you feel like I'm not adequate enough, I've got this problem, I can't fix it, I can't take care of it. It's not your job, it's God's job. It's not your kid, it's God's kid. It's not your problem, it's God's problem. He is the one who transforms and renews and brings about accomplishing something that is greater than you could ever ask, think, or imagine. So I want to leave you with this question today. And as you continue in 21 days of prayer, and if you've dropped off at all, download the Compass app, join us in completing this final 21 days of prayer. You can come and join us in praying at the Land at 2 p.m. today. Watch social media if it rains, and I'm going to cancel it. I will let you know on social media. But I want you to be left with this question right now. As you leave today, what are you not attempting that God has called you to? And you know He's called you to it. He has called you to reach out to your neighbor. You just haven't done anything. Go. He's called you to serve. And you're like, well, I'm not ready. Go, take the first step in the strength and the ability that God has already given to you. And we're going to pick it up there next week as we continue our series, Dark Horses. Thank you, guys.